So this is a video about demand, and is in demand and supply. And we're going to go over some basic concepts first, some vocab and concepts. First is the idea of a market. You hear this all the time, but it's important to realize that when we're talking about demand, we're talking about demand in a certain market, a group of buyers and sellers of a particular good or service. The buyers of the group determine the demand for the product. They are the demanders, and the sellers as a group determine the supply of a product. They are the suppliers. But right now we're just focused on demand. And as consumers, we can all understand that pretty simply. So a market can be a small town, a state, the world, for a particular good or service. A competitive market is a market in which there's so many buyers and so many sellers that each has a negligible impact on the market price. There's so many sellers. I can say, if I'm a provider of this good, that hey, I want X amount for the good. I'm going to charge more. Not really going to impact the market that much. There's so many. In fact, there is a concept called a perfectly competitive market. That's at one extreme. The other extreme is a monopoly. We have one seller. A competitive market has two characteristics. A perfectly competitive market. One is the goods offered for sale are all exactly the same. Now, we're going to pretend that's the case of all the examples we use. It's not always the case, but let's pretend they are. I'm talking about something like gas. Okay, gas is gas. Different oil companies talk about different additives, but gas is basically gas. Milk is basically milk. Tens of thousands of dairies, but milk is milk. The second thing is that buyers and sellers are so numerous in a perfectly competitive market that no single buyer or seller has any influence over the price. So let's talk about gas. There are hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of gas stations in America. There are tens of millions, hundreds of millions of buyers. So if it's a buyer, I can't say, I'm tired of paying $4.50 a gallon for gas. I'm only going to pay $3. That's not going to be realistic. I'm one of millions. That's not going to move the market. Or I own a single gas station. I can't make a profit selling gas this high. I'm going to sell my gas for $10 a gallon. Nobody's going to buy it. So in a perfectly competitive market, therefore, buyers and sellers are price takers. They have no control. They have to accept the market price determined by interaction between millions of buyers and millions of sellers. In a monopolistic market, we have just one seller. That person can set the price. They're called a market maker. But in a perfectly competitive market, we're all price takers. So quantity demanded. So that's the amount of good that buyers as a whole are willing and able to purchase at a certain price. The law of demand is very intuitive. Other things being equal, ceteris paribus, the quantity demanded for a good falls when the price of the good rises. This just makes sense. When the price goes up, the market will demand less. When the price goes down, the market will demand more, given those change in prices. Now, a demand schedule is simply a list of quantities demanded at various prices. Got a list of prices and a list of quantities demanded in the current market at each price. And obviously, the quantity demanded will go up as the price goes down and vice versa. A demand curve, which is actually going to be a line graph, not an actual curve. Just don't worry about that. A demand curve is a graph of the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity. A demand curve is a graph of a demand schedule. So let's look at that, what that looks like. So here's a demand schedule. We have an imaginary market. It's very small. And we're talking about the market for ice cream cones. And at a price of $0, they're free. 12 will be demanded in this market. Raise the price 50 cents, and 2 people are saying, I'm not going to pay anything for a cone. But 10 people will pay 50 cents for a cone, and so on down to a price of $3, which nobody is willing to buy a cone. Therefore, quantity demanded is 0. All right? If we graph this, so our vertical axis is always going to be the price. So we've listed the prices from 0 up to 350. Our horizontal axis is always going to be the quantity. So from 0 to 12. And you see at a price of $3, the quantity demanded is 0. At a price of $2.50, the quantity demanded is 2, and so on. As the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. That's the law of demand. Um, that's pretty straightforward. So those definitions and concepts, if you weren't taking notes, here's a link to a PDF of those definitions and concepts, and that's going to be useful notes. For the rest of this video, I'm going to complete a handout on the screen, and I want you to complete it along with me. Here's a copy of that handout. It's supply and demand. We're going to do supply in another video. We're going to do demand first. And this handout's important because when when you are done with this video, you can keep this handout to answer questions for practice, for mastery checks, and for your final exam. So this is a very, very important demand out. You need to hang on to it. So let's highlight some things here. Now I'm gonna draw here, and I'm using my right hand, of course, for the mouse, and I'm left-handed, so I draw very poorly. So be forewarned. So a couple of reminders here at the top that will be helpful in an assessment. Demand, demand for a good is equal to the demand schedule. So it's the entire schedule. Not working very well here. My pen. Demand schedule. There we go. Demand is equal to the demand schedule. Demand is the entire schedule, also the entire curve. So the entire curve is demand for a product in a particular market. Demand, however, is not the same thing, does not equal quantity demanded. Quantity demanded is a point on the curve. It's a point in the schedule. Demand is the entire schedule, the entire curve, all of the quantities demanded at various prices. That's an important point. Second thing to remember is increase versus decrease in demand. We're only working with one curve right now, but soon we'll add curves. We'll have an increase in demand. That is a curve shift right, and that makes sense because there's a zero at the origin on the left, bottom left of the curve. If the new demand schedule is to the right of the original demand schedule, that is an increase in demand. It's easy to remember because that is it's moving away from zero. It's increasing. A decrease in demand is a curve shift left, closer to the zero. So any given price, the quantity demand would be lower if it's a decrease in demand and higher if it's an increase in demand. Okay, more about that later. There are 5 things that change demand, that will change the curve. And I want to go over those 5 things. They're called the determinants of demand. And one thing that will not change demand is price, right? The price changes, we're just moving up and down the curve. The price for, let's say, gas will not change demand for gas. It will change the quantity demanded. Now, there are 5 things that will change it, however. Income is one, and it changes in 2 different ways. So income and normal goods. A normal good is a good for which you, as your income increases, you buy more of it. So it's a normal good thing that people want more of. I'm not going to attempt to write here. Maybe I will attempt a little bit. Yes, that's an S. So write steak right here, S-T-E-A-K. Because steak's a normal good. You may think, I don't eat steak. I don't buy more steak, regardless of my income. I know. I'm talking about the market as a whole. The market, on average, if its income goes up, it will buy more steak. So let's look at what happens here. So let's say the income goes up. All right. Don't know quite. I'm doing my tools here. All right. Let's say income goes up. Income is the variable, right? What happens to demand for steak? Well, intuitively, it's going to go up. We make more money. We're going to buy more steak. We like steak. Let's say, however, that our income goes down. What's that going to do for our demand for steak? Well, it's going to be the opposite of the last one. Our demand for steak is also going to go down. We can't afford as much steak if our income goes down. So normal goods, we're going to buy less of when our income goes down, more of when our income goes up. However, there's something called inferior goods. An example, so inferior goods are they're not as good. They're stuff that low and moderate income people buy a lot of because they can't afford to buy anything better. Used clothing, bus rides, things like that. So continuing our example of meat products, let's say spam, S-P-A-M. Put that right here for an inferior good. That's the canned ham, not unwanted email. Um, so when our income goes up, our income for inferior goods is going to go down. We're going to buy new clothes. We're going to buy steak, not spam. Our income, our demand for spam, going to go down. But let's say our wages go down. Our demand for inferior goods going to go up by the very nature of inferior goods. We can't afford steak. We got to buy more spam, right? All right, another thing. Now I said price. The price of gas does not affect the demand for gas, but the prices of related goods does. And there are two kinds. There are substitutes. So in my example, I'm using mopeds and bicycles. This is a very old example. It's not a very good one because I don't think y'all are familiar with what mopeds are. They were popular in the 70s. They're like a little dirt bike with pedals, or an awkward, clunky bike, but with a motor. So they're better than bicycles, but not a lot. So let's say the price of we're talking about the demand for bicycles, by the way. So, and the related good is mopeds. The price of mopeds, let's say, goes up. What is that going to do to our demand for bicycles? Well, if the price of mopeds goes up, the law of demand says people will buy fewer mopeds. And if they're buying fewer mopeds, they're going to turn to the substitute bicycles, and the demand for bicycles is going to go up. Let's say the price of mopeds goes down. Then people will buy more mopeds. And if they're buying more mopeds, they're going to buy fewer of bicycles. So demand for bicycles goes down. What about, so there's another kind of related good. So substitutes, you use one or the other. Complements are goods you use together. And a good example is computers and software. That's a perfect example because you can't use one without the other. Perfect complements. So let's say the price of computers is our variable. We're talking about the demand for software. Okay, price of computers goes up. Okay, well, law of demand says people will buy fewer computers, and if they're buying fewer computers, their demand for software will go down in aggregate on the market as a whole. Let's say, however, the price of computers goes down. How does this affect software? Well, price of computers goes down, people buy more computers, they will necessarily have to buy more software. All right? Those are kind of complicated. With the other three variables, there's just one example each. Taste. Now, I might write in here too, taste and preferences. So taste is not just a style issue. It might be, your preference for your blood pressure is high, so your preference for blood pressure medication goes up. But our example here is simply taste and style. So let's say preference for polo style shirts, 3 buttons, collar, short sleeve shirt, change. Let's say it's 1980s and preppy's super cool. So the preferences for polo style shirts goes up. What does that do to demand for polo shirts? It's pretty obvious. It goes up. Now it's the 90s and grunge is big and preferences for polo style shirts has gone down. What does that do to demand for polo style shirts? It goes down, obviously. Now, and by the way, I say expectations, I mean price expectations. You might add price right here. So here's another way. So the price of gas won't affect demand for gas, but the expectations of price in the future will. So let's say the price of gas is expected to rise. Let's just be extreme. Let's say that tomorrow the news indicates that tomorrow Iran has nuked Saudi Arabia, Russia's cut off their exports of oil. So starting tomorrow, the price of gas is going to skyrocket. All right, it's going to get very, very high. So let's say I've got a quarter of a tank of gas, but I want to get the cheap gas now before gas gets very expensive. So my demand for gas right now, based on my expectations of a rise in gas, are going to go up. I want to go fill up right now before gas gets really expensive. Let's say, however, that we think gas is going to plummet tomorrow. All right, the price of gas is going to plummet, and I'm running on fumes, but I'm going to risk going home from school and getting my demand for gas today is going to go down because I want to get gas um, tomorrow at the super cheap price. Or if flat screen TVs, I think they're going to be a lot cheaper in 6 months. My demand for one right now is going to go down. I'm going to hold out to get the cheap price later. Or I'm going to buy now to avoid the high price later. All right, the last one's very straightforward. So, number of buyers. In our example, is immigrants. Let's say we have a bunch of immigrants move into Alabama from Ukraine, and they eat a lot of potatoes. How's that going to affect the demand for potatoes? Well, you got more buyers, so you got more demand. You're going to have an increase in demand for potatoes. Conversely, let's say Ukraine kicks Russia out and they all want to go home, and our Ukrainian immigrants all go down Alabama. What's that going to do to the demand for potatoes, which they love? It's going to go down. All right. So keep this handout handy, and you will use it on all your future assessments, and we'll complete the second half in our next video. Let's see if I can make this video stop.